Okay. Now we're going to look at the second reading, the one from Philippians, and Mike Himmel is going to take us through the lectionary version there. Be sure to jot down any words or phrases or images that come to you.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Philippians. Brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord always. I shall say it again, rejoice. Your kindness should be known to all. The Lord is near. Have no anxiety at all, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God. Then the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so while Mike was reading, what words or phrases struck you? What images? If you're Zooming, be sure to unmute yourself. The Lord is near.
Rejoice in the Lord always.
Rejoice in the Lord always.
Make your requests known to God.
Make your requests known to God. Peace of God. Okay, I'll give some background. A lot of this is from Raymond Brown's introduction to the New Testament. The date is somewhere between 56 to 63, depending on where it was written. Paul was in prison, and he was in prison several times. And so which imprisonment this comes from determines the date. It's about 56 if he wrote from Ephesus, 58 to 60 if he wrote from Caesarea, or 61 to 63 if he wrote from Rome. The recipients, a place called Philippi, it was a Roman colony. Colony was where retired soldiers were given land. Now they could be farmers. And so the colony starts. And this was evangelized by Paul about 50 AD. So this letter is 5 to 10 years after he was there. The author is Paul. This is one of the undisputed Pauline letters. I give you a footnote. Scholars argue about the letters of Paul. The footnote tells you which ones they argue about, but practically nobody argues about Philippians. Everyone agrees it's Paul. What they do argue about is whether it was originally all one letter or whether two separate letters of Paul have been combined. And scholars are pretty evenly split on that. Here's the outline, which is very similar to the outline given in the New American Bible Revised Edition right before Philippians. I'm sure they borrowed from Brown, as I'm doing right now. So he starts, as all his letters do, with an address, the greeting and thanksgiving. Then we have Paul's situation in prison and his attitude toward death. We talked about this. Did Paul think that the parousia was near? Yes, he did. When he wrote First Thessalonians, he was convinced that he and most of the people he was writing to would be there when Christ came again. Now in Philippians, he still thinks Christ is going to come within a couple of months or a year, but he's not sure he's going to live that long. So he's starting to come to terms with the fact that he personally might not live to see the Lord come. Then his exhortation to follow the example of Christ, one of the most famous pieces of Christian poetry, the Christological hymn in Philippians. Though he was in the form of God, he did not deem equality with God something to be clung to, but rather he emptied himself. We read it every Good Friday. Then Paul's interest in the Philippians and his planned missions to them. He gives a warning against false teachers. And then there's a section on instructions for the community. And that's the section, I have that highlighted, that our passage today comes from. He follows this, thanking the Philippians for their generosity. They were one of the most generous churches who supported his mission. And of all the churches that he worked with, he had less trouble with Philippians than anybody else. And then the concluding greeting and blessing. So focusing in on that section, instructions for the community. First, in verse 1, there's encouragement to the community as a whole to stand firm. Then in verses 2 and 3, he gives encouragement to Euodia and Syntyche. These are two women who are important leaders in the church, and evidently they're not getting along. And so Paul is encouraging them to patch up their differences for the sake of the good of the church. As John Powell would say, to live above with the saints we love, that's true glory. To live below with the saints we know, that's another story. Okay. So then there's the encouragement. He follows this with encouragement to joy and peace. That's today's passage. And then he follows that with a general encouragement to virtue. And so our liturgical context, the third Sunday of Lent is Gaudete Sunday. In most parishes, instead of wearing the violet vestments, they'll wear some form of pink vestments. And the entrance antiphon for today's Mass, in Latin, it starts Gaudete. It comes from this passage in Philippians. So this reading, back when we only had 2 readings on Sunday, this was the reading that traditionally was attached to it before we put an Old Testament reading before it. And so that's how Gaudete Sunday gets its name. The first word in Jerome's Latin translation is Gaudete. And this rejoice, that word struck some of you, and it's important. Paul repeats it. I'll say it again, rejoice. So the Lord is near. Paul is thinking chronologically of the parousia, the advent of Jesus in glory. It's going to be any day, any week, any month now. We can ask, since Jesus didn't come, is our experience of the nearness of the Lord, which is not chronological, is our experience of the nearness of the Lord essentially different from the Old Testament experience of Isaiah 12. Great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. That awareness of God's presence. Most preachers will reinterpret Paul's temporal sense of nearness to some other teaching on the Lord is close to us in many mysterious ways. And one of my favorite Advent stories is the story of Saint Martin of Tours. He was a Roman centurion, and the story is that he and his men were traveling. It was winter, it was snowy, and there was a beggar freezing beside the road, and he stopped. He took off his cloak and he took out his sword and he whacked it in half and threw half of it to the beggar. And he led the men the rest of the day's march. And that night they made their camp. And when he went to sleep that night, he had a vision of Christ in heaven. And Christ was wearing half of a soldier's cloak. So that's whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers. Saint Martin of Tours, great story. Some final reflections. Paul's encouragement to joy is not a reference to the type of human experience when everything's going well. Everybody have a good time. Rather, he is writing from prison. We're not sure where, but we're sure he's in prison, and he doesn't know if he's going to live or die. The joy Paul writes about is a gift of God. God who can be co-present with suffering. I think every woman who has given birth to a child can relate to this combination of suffering and joy at the same time. And I personally relate it to my experience as a marathoner. And I wasn't consciously aware of this till Easter Sunday. I think it was 1979. I was at St. Mary of the Pines, and I woke up Easter Sunday morning with a hot appendix and ended up being taken to Shumpert Hospital. Dr. Holobeck took one look at me and said, "Father, you're going to need a surgeon." And I'm forgetting the man's name right now. He says, "Dr. Black, do you trust Dr. Black?" I said, "If you trust him, I trust him." And by that time, I was feeling bad enough that he said, "We're going to have to amputate your head, Father." I would say, "Okay, go ahead, let's do it." Well, anyhow, when I was recovering, the nurses were amazed. Like the day afterwards, I was out in the hall with the little IV thing that was on me, and I was walking around and around the square there, and I calculated that I did a mile. And after I had started walking, I figured my pace, and I said, the last time I ran a marathon, I hurt worse than I hurt right now, and I was having a good time.
Yeah.
So I'm starting my comeback training right now, and I managed to do a mile that day, and then the next day I went out several times and I logged 3 miles. I figured I was walking at least a mile and a half an hour, and so I logged 3 miles the second day. But the point is that joy doesn't have to be when there's no pain or even sorrow in your life. There can be it's a joy that can be present even in sad and difficult or painful times. So having said that, I'll ask Jane to come proclaim the reading to us from the King James Version.
A reading from Philippians. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. And thank you, Jane. So,
Father, excuse me, could she read verse 6 again?
verse 6. Okay.
Her verse 6.
her verse 6. Okay, let me try something here.
Okay,
I got my Bible Works up and running. And so where are we now? We're in Philippians 4:6. Let me share this screen now. So Zoom meeting, share screen. So I'm trying to share my Bible Works screen with you. And so Philippians 4:6, and I hit enter, and let's see. So then I have my Greek and my Douay and some Syriac translations, and then we come down. Here's the King James Version. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. So be careful for nothing. That's be careful for nothing. Looking at the Greek, I understand it better. The Greek says, don't worry about anything. Okay, but so not to worry was be careful for nothing. So don't worry. Don't be full of cares about. Careful didn't just mean don't have any accidents. It meant be full of cares. Be careful. That's how that word has changed in meaning. So one of the troubles with the Douay version and words and the King James is that the words no longer mean what they used to mean. So careful doesn't mean what it meant in the 1600s. Another word, which I was a little bit shocked when I was a high school seminarian, and I read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. And to me, naughty, like a naughty girl might be a little girl who wrote on the wall with crayons or something like that. Well, Benjamin Franklin said that he got a naughty girl pregnant. So naughty in the 1700s was very much different from naughty today. Or in Shakespeare's Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? And people say, well, he's right below the balcony, wherefore art thou? But wherefore didn't mean what is your location in space. Wherefore meant why. She's asking, why are you a member of the Romeo clan that my clan hates? She's not saying, where are you? Oh, hey, I'm down here. So the trouble with these wonderful, beautiful translations, King James and Douay, is that English no longer means what it meant 3 or 4 centuries ago. I'll stop sharing the screen here. And so thank you for your question. And I'm going to go ahead and end this one, so we'll have close to half an hour for the gospel. So we'll stop this recording.